On a crisp December morning, Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, awoke not to the weight of a public schedule, but to a quiet, personal longing. For years, the grandeur of royal Christmas had been a spectacle she navigated with grace. Yet this year, amidst the ancient carols and glittering tiaras, she carried a private hope to find, within the most watched family in the world, a simple, unobserved moment of authentic peace, a genuine Christmas feeling for herself, for her young family, and perhaps for the monarchy she now helps to lead. The early December frost still clung to the grounds of Anmer Hall, painting the Norfolk landscape in shades of silver and white. Inside, the warm glow of kitchen lights cut through the dawn's gloom. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, stood by the Aga, her hands curled around a mug of tea. The house was quiet, a rare and precious silence before the whirlwind of the royal Christmas season began. Through the window, she could see the skeletal branches of the trees, a stark reminder of the year that was winding down. Her mind, however, was already leaping ahead to the coming days, to the journey to Sandringham, and to the event that always seemed to crystallize the public's fascination with the monarchy, the Christmas Day walk to church. This year felt different. The public adoration for her family was a tangible force, a warmth she gratefully acknowledged. Yet, beneath the surface of the perfectly coordinated coats and the cheerful waves, there was a quieter, more personal current running through her. She was no longer the newcomer tentatively finding her footing. She was a senior royal, a mother of 3 growing children who were beginning to understand their unique place in the world, and a wife to a man who carried the future of the institution on his shoulders. The Christmas service, with its ancient hymns and centuries-old rituals, was more than a photo opportunity. It was a rare point in the year where the personal, the familial, and the monumental weight of duty intersected under the public gaze. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of padding feet. Prince George, already displaying a serious demeanor that reminded her so much of William at that age, appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Is it today we go to Granny's?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. Kate smiled, setting her tea down. "Not today, my love. Soon." She pulled him into a hug, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. The children's excitement was a beautiful, grounding thing. Their Christmas was about magic, about presents under the tree at Sandringham, about the novelty of staying in the big house. For them, the walk to St. Mary Magdalene Church was simply something they did on Christmas morning, a part of their family tradition, albeit one watched by hundreds of well-wishers and cameras from around the globe. Later that morning, as she reviewed the final details of their packing with her assistant, the familiar list of outfits, the daytime wear for the walk, the formal attire for the Christmas lunch, she felt a pang of that old nervous energy. The world would dissect every detail: her hat, her dress, the children's manners, the interaction between her and William, the subtle dynamics with the rest of the family. It was a performance, yes, but one she had learned to navigate with a genuine warmth that had become her signature. The challenge, she had found, was not to appear perfect, but to appear present. To let the public see a glimpse of a real family sharing a Christmas moment, even within the goldfish bowl. William found her in the study, gazing at a photo on the wall from a previous Christmas walk. He came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "All set?" he asked, his voice low. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. "Just thinking," she said, "about the service. It always feels significant." He nodded, understanding the layers in her words. "It's ours too," he said simply. "However, many people line the path. That hour in the pew, it's just us listening to the lessons and singing the carols. Try to hold on to that." His advice was practical, born of a lifetime's experience. He had been the small boy in shorts, then the teenage son walking behind a separated mother and father, then the young man bearing the weight of a grieving nation. He knew the dissonance better than anyone. The journey to Sandringham was a familiar ritual in itself. The car moved through the Norfolk lanes, the children occupied with tablets and games, the landscape growing more recognizably royal with every mile. As the great house came into view, a sense of history, both daunting and comforting, settled over Kate. This was where Queen Elizabeth II had spent every Christmas of her long reign, where generations of Windsors had gathered. The traditions here were etched in stone. Her own first Christmas here as William's fiancée felt a lifetime ago, a blur of nerves and newness. Now, she was helping to establish the traditions for the next generation. They were greeted warmly by the staff, for whom the royal family's arrival was the start of their own carefully orchestrated Christmas. The halls, adorned with tasteful decorations and towering trees, smelled of pine and polish. The children's excitement bubbled over as they raced to find their rooms, their voices echoing in the grand corridors. Kate took a moment alone in the room she and William shared, looking out over the vast parkland. The peace was immense, a world away from the crowds that would gather in just a few days' time. She thought of the small, joyful Christmas services she'd attended as a child in Bucklebury, the simplicity of it all. That was the feeling she sought to bring here, to infuse this ancient protocol with a sense of normal, heartfelt joy. It was a tall order, but as she watched Louis's little figure dash past the window below, chasing a gardener's terrier, she smiled. Perhaps the joy was already here. It just needed space to breathe. The days leading up to Christmas Eve were a pleasant, busy blur of private family moments within the Sandringham bubble. There were long, muddy walks with the dogs, the children's cheeks glowing with the cold. There were quieter afternoons where Kate helped Charlotte and George make cards for the staff, their tongues poking out in concentration. She sat with Louis, patiently guiding his small hands as he wrapped a clumsily presented gift for his grandfather. These were the moments she clung to, the ordinary glue that held the extraordinary life together. On Christmas Eve afternoon, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The final preparations for the next day's very public event began. Outfits were laid out in each room. Kate's dress, a deep, festive crimson, hung beside William's suit. The children's little coats and polished shoes were arranged with care. A dresser brought in the hats. Kate's choice was elegant, but understated, a nod to tradition withat overwhelming her features. As she tried it on, checking her reflection, she wasn't thinking of the fashion critics, but of the practicalities. Would it stay on in a breeze? Could she easily bend down to talk to Louis without a tipping? That evening, the family gathered for the traditional Christmas Eve dinner. The mood was convivial, a relaxed formality that characterized the Windsor gatherings. King Charles, in his element as patriarch, led the conversation, his voice warm. Queen Camilla offered easy, inclusive smiles. The younger cousins chattered, creating a lively hum. Kate watched William across the table, sharing a joke with his father, and felt a surge of deep affection. This was the other side of the coin, the family unit, loud, sometimes messy, bound by shared history and love, not just duty. Later, as per a newer tradition she and William had quietly instituted, they gathered their 3 children in their sitting room. The lights were dimmed, the tree they had decorated themselves twinkling in the corner. William opened a worn copy of The Night Before Christmas and began to read. George listened intently. Charlotte curled into Kate's side, and Louis, fighting sleep, played with the tassel on a cushion. In this room, surrounded by her husband and children, the vast machinery of monarchy felt very far away. This was their core. This was the us William had spoken of. Kate's heart felt full. Whatever tomorrow brought, this moment of unobserved, pure familial love was the true anchor. As she tucked each child into bed, receiving sticky kisses and whispered excitement about Father Christmas's imminent visit to Sandringham, her resolve solidified. Tomorrow was not about putting on a show. It was about carrying this private, loving warmth from this quiet room out into the public sphere. It was about letting the world see that at the heart of the ancient institution was a family, not so different from any other, seeking to celebrate Christmas together. She kissed Louis's forehead, smoothing his hair. "Sweet dreams, my darling," she whispered. "Tomorrow is a happy day." Christmas Day dawned bright and bitterly cold, a pale winter sun doing little to melt the frost that sparkled like diamond dust on the Sandringham estate. Inside the big house, the early hours were controlled, cheerful chaos. The children, awake at first light to investigate the treasures left by Father Christmas, brought a wave of excited energy through the corridors. Their laughter was infectious, breaking through any lingering traces of pre-walk nerves. Kate, sipping her morning tea, felt a calm settle over her. The private joy of the morning, the wrapping paper strewn across the floor, the children's delighted shouts had fortified her. The transformation from a private family morning to a public appearance was a carefully managed operation. Hair was styled, final touches were put on outfits. Kate helped Charlotte with the buttons on her coat, her fingers fumbling slightly in the cool room. "Remember to smile, darling," she said softly, not as an instruction for the cameras, but as a mother's encouragement to enjoy the walk. "And hold George's or Daddy's hand when we're near the crowds." Charlotte nodded, her eyes wide with anticipation. George, trying to appear very grown-up, stood patiently as William straightened his tie. Louis, a bundle of irrepressible energy, required a last-minute catch-in, clean after mishap with a stray piece of chocolate. Finally, the moment arrived. The family assembled in the grand hall. King Charles and Queen Camilla joined them, the king offering a kind, bolstering smile to his grandchildren. Then, they moved as a group towards the door. This was the threshold moment, the transition from the private sanctuary to the public stage. Kate took a deep, steadying breath, feeling William's hand briefly press the small of her back. Then, the doors opened. The cold air hit them first, sharp and clean. Then, the sound, a distant, happy roar that grew louder as they stepped into view and began the short walk down the path to the church. The crowd, bundled in scarves and hats, their breaths making plumes in the air, was a sea of smiling, waving faces. The calls of "Merry Christmas" and "Happy Christmas, Kate" washed over them. Kate's smile, practiced as it might have been, became entirely genuine in the face of such warmth. This was not an anonymous crowd. These were people who had stood for hours in the cold, not out of mere curiosity, but to share a moment of festive goodwill. She waved, making sure to look at different sections of the crowd, her eyes meeting those of well-wishers, especially the children held on shoulders. The walk was a familiar dance. They moved at a measured pace, allowing the photographers their shots. William chatted easily with his father. Kate leaned down to point out a particularly enthusiastic waving Santa hat to Louis, who giggled and waved back with both hands. She placed a guiding hand on Charlotte's shoulder, feeling the little girl's excitement thrumming through her thick coat. George walked beside his grandfather, their conversation private, but their postures mirror images of respectful attention. It was, Kate reflected as the small, ancient church came into view, a perfect snapshot of their family as it was now. A bridge between generations, moving forward together. The inside of St. Mary Magdalene Church was a sudden, profound contrast. The cacophony of the crowd was replaced by a hushed, holy silence, broken only by the soft organ prelude and the rustle of the congregation, a mix of local families, estate workers, and household staff, standing as the royal family entered. The scent of old wood, wax, and fragrant greenery filled the air. This was the heart of the tradition. As they took their places in the front pews, the weight of history was palpable. Kate glanced at the simple brass plaque marking where Queen Elizabeth II had always sat. The absence was still felt, but today it felt less like a void and more like a legacy they were now stewarding. The service began. The familiar words of the Christmas lesson, read by a member of the family in years past, now read by a local dignitary, resonated in the small space. As the first chords of "O Come, All Ye Faithful" swelled from the organ, Kate felt an unexpected lump form in her throat. She was not a person given to public displays of deep emotion, but in this moment, surrounded by her family, the ancient words of joy and hope washing over her, the dichotomy of her life fell away. She was not a princess here. She was a mother, a wife, a woman in a congregation, singing a carol she had sung since childhood. She felt William's solid presence beside her, heard Charlotte's sweet, slightly off-key voice next to her, and saw Lewis for a miraculous moment, standing still and looking at his hymn sheet with earnest confusion. This was the authenticity she had been yearning for. It was not manufactured. It was discovered within the tradition itself. The public spectacle outside was forgotten. For this precious hour, within these hallowed walls, it was simply Christmas. The final blessing echoed in the still air of the church, and a deep, collective sense of peace seemed to settle over the congregation. As the royal family rose to leave, the atmosphere was different from when they had entered. The formality had softened, replaced by a contented, shared experience. Kate, guiding a now slightly fidgety Lewis back into the aisle, caught William's eye. He gave her a small, private smile, a silent acknowledgement that he, too, had felt the significance of the service. The walk back to Sandringham House was a reversal of the earlier journey, but the feeling had transformed. The crowd's cheers seemed warmer, somehow less like noise, and more like an extension of the communal joy they had just celebrated in the church. Kate felt lighter, her waves more relaxed, her smiles easier. The mission, as she had privately defined it, felt accomplished. The authentic feeling had been found, not in spite of the public gaze, but almost within it, crystallized in the sacred space of the service. Back at the house, the formal Christmas lunch awaited, a multi-course affair with all the traditional splendor. But first, there was a brief interlude of relative privacy in their rooms. The children, their formal duty done, were allowed to change into more comfortable clothes, their excitement now refocused on the afternoon's presents and games. Kate took a few moments alone, removing her hat and looking at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed quietly satisfied. The morning had held no missteps, no awkwardness, just a smooth flow of genuine connection with the public, with the tradition, and, most importantly, with her own family. The lunch in the grand dining room was a cheerful, noisy affair. Crackers were pulled, paper hats were worn at rakish angles, even by the king. Stories were shared, laughter rang out. Kate watched as Lewis, emboldened by the festive spirit, made the table laugh with a nonsensical joke from his cracker. She saw Charles throw his head back with a genuine guffaw, the sound rich and warm. In that moment, the family dynamics were not of hierarchy, but of simple celebration. The conversations were easy, flowing from the morning service to the children's plans for their new toys. Kate participated fully, her earlier introspection giving way to present enjoyment. She felt completely integrated, not as an outsider who had learned the rules, but as a central pillar of this family's future. The afternoon melted into a gentle, festive haze. There were more presents exchanged in the drawing room, a chaotic, happy mess of ribbon and paper. There was a walk, less formal, more of a ramble, with the dogs in the fading afternoon light. The children, tired from the day's excitements, became quieter, cuddling up with new books on sofas. As dusk painted the sky in shades of lavender and deep blue, Kate found herself standing at a window with William, looking out at the darkening park. They were silent for a moment, both absorbing the day. "It was a good one," William said finally, his voice quiet. "The children did wonderfully." "They did," Kate agreed, leaning into him. "And it felt real, didn't it?" He nodded, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It did, because you made it so." The compliment was simple, but it meant everything. That evening, after the children were finally in bed, exhausted and happy, the adults gathered for a final, quiet drink. The mood was one of accomplished relaxation. The public face of Christmas was over for another year. What remained was the private satisfaction of a day well spent. As Kate finally retired to her room, the events of the day played like a comforting film in her mind. The cold morning air, the roar of the crowd, the hushed reverence of the church, the joyous chaos of lunch, the peaceful twilight, all of it wove together into a perfect tapestry. The hook she had felt, the longing for an authentic Christmas feeling, had not only been answered but had been woven into the very fabric of the day's traditions. She had not found it in a single isolated moment, but in the seamless flow from private to public and back again. As she drifted off to sleep, the distant sound of carolers on the estate carried on the frosty night air, a final, perfect note to a day that had been, in every sense, joyful. The days following Christmas at Sandringham held a different, slower rhythm. The intense public focus had passed, leaving behind a relaxed atmosphere of a family enjoying the holiday season together in their country home. For Kate, this was a precious time to decompress and reflect. The success of the Christmas Day walk and service wasn't measured in newspaper headlines, though those were overwhelmingly positive, praising the family's warmth and the children's charm, but in a lingering feeling of contentment that permeated the house. She spent long hours outdoors with the children, wrapped in thick scarves and woolly hats, their laughter echoing across the frosty grounds. They built hopelessly lopsided snowmen when a light dusting fell, went on treasure hunts organized by William, and visited the estate stables, where the smell of hay and horses was a welcome change from pine and polish. These were the unphotographed, unscripted moments that formed the backbone of their family life. Watching George patiently show Charlotte how to hold out an apple flat on her palm, or seeing Louis's look of sheer wonder as a groom let him brush a gentle pony, Kate felt a deep sense of normalcy. This was the life she and William were determined to give their children, a stable, loving anchor amidst the inescapable strangeness of their destiny. One afternoon, she found herself alone with King Charles in the library. He was examining a large, leather-bound book of botanical prints, a gift from a visiting dignitary. "Ah, Catherine," he said, looking up with a smile, "come and see this magnificent rendering of a Rosa Gallica. The detail is quite remarkable." She joined him, admiring the careful artwork. Their conversation, which began with the flowers, meandered easily. He spoke of his own childhood Christmases at Sandringham, of the rituals that had changed and those that had remained steadfast. He talked, not as a monarch, but as a grandfather and father, expressing his delight in seeing George, Charlotte, and Louis so full of life. "You and William are doing a splendid job with them," he said, his voice sincere. "They have a wonderful balance. They understand their place, but they are not burdened by it. That is a great gift." The praise, coming from him, felt like a significant benediction. It was an acknowledgement that she was not just supporting William, but was actively shaping the future character of the monarchy through their children. New Year's Eve was celebrated quietly at Sandringham, a private dinner followed by a gathering at the door to hear the bells of the local church ring in the new year. Standing with William, his arm around her shoulders, surrounded by their sleepy children and the rest of the family, Kate looked up at the cold, clear sky blazing with stars. The old year, with all its challenges and triumphs, was slipping away. The new one stretched ahead, full of unknown duties, joys, and hurdles. But she felt ready. The Christmas just past had served as a powerful reminder of her tools, her genuine warmth, her focus on family, and her ability to find and project authenticity within centuries-old traditions. Their return to Anmer Hall in early January was bittersweet. Sandringham's grand bubble had burst, replaced by the familiar comfort of their own home. The Christmas decorations were packed away, the routines of school and work loomed. But something subtle had shifted within Kate. The experience had reinforced her own role, not just as a wife and mother, but as a key public figure in her own right. The joyful Christmas service had been more than a single event. It had been a testament to a style of modern royalty she was helping to define, one that could be both majestic and relatable, traditional and genuinely heartfelt. A few days later, a large, official envelope arrived. It contained a selection of the most poignant photographs from the Christmas walk. There was one in particular that caught her eye. It was not a perfectly posed shot of them all smiling at the camera. Instead, it was a moment captured as they entered the church. She was looking down at Louis, her face angled away from the cameras, her expression one of pure, tender focus as she helped him over the ancient stone step. William was a half step ahead, holding the door open, looking back at them with a protective, loving glance. Charlotte and George were just visible, following closely. The photo told a story not of pomp, but of care. It was a family entering a sacred space together. Kate had it framed and placed on her desk. It was her reminder, not of the day the world saw, but of the feeling she had carried within it, a feeling of joyful, grounded belonging that she knew would guide her through all the Christmases and all the ordinary, extraordinary days yet to come.